It was time to replace the broken particle board dresser that my twin boys have been using for the last 9 years. We're going to be selling our house and moving in with my in-laws while we build a new custom house this year. So I needed something small enough that it could fit into a small room or even into a closet if it needed to. After building the modern armchair a few weeks back, I'm still on this roundover kick, and so I wanted to incorporate dowel legs and just rounded shapes throughout the whole design. Keep watching and see how it all came together. This video is sponsored by my friends at Dowel Products. When I bought my materials at Home Depot, I had somebody help me rip down the plywood into some manageable size panels. Then, when I got home, I used a circular saw to cut the pieces to the specific size that I need. I intended to make the entire dresser out of this 3/4 inch plywood. That included the drawer boxes, and so that meant lots of repeated cuts. Time to pull out the table saw. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that the table saw is not my favorite tool, and I've tried to avoid it in the past. But recently, I actually received a new DeWalt contractor saw, and I feel a lot more comfortable with it, especially considering it still has safety features like a riving knife and a blade guard. Hands down, the best feature though is the micro adjust fence. After ripping and cutting all the plywood down, I turned my attention to the joinery. And for this project, I wanted to move kind of quickly, so I decided to use pocket holes. Pocket holes aren't great for every joinery situation, but for cabinet building, especially with plywood, they actually are pretty good. I began to assemble the box portion of the dresser, and I used my little glue-up technique that I've been using lately. First, I applied DAP carpenter's glue to the adjoining faces, but then I add a few drops of rapid fuse CA glue, which is a quick setting glue and will hold the joints together quickly while the carpenter glue has time to dry. Thanks for coming back and checking out a new video. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new project. I connected the box pieces together using 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws. I needed to add some stability to the box, as well as I had a problem with the plywood bowing out in the middle. So I cut a couple of strips of scrap plywood, the exact length of the top and bottom of the box opening. You can see there was about a 1/4 inch difference between the opening at the bottom of the box and the middle where the plywood is bowing out. I marked the center of the box opening and then drilled more pocket holes on the ends of the scrap plywood pieces. I used a long clamp to help pull in the bowed sides of the plywood box. I then attached 2 of the plywood scrap supports using more pocket hole screws and holding the sides in together. Adding a back panel would also give the dresser box a lot of strength and stability. I decided to use a 3/8 inch rabbiting bit on my trim router to create a simple little ledge where the back panel could sit and not be seen from the side. This step totally isn't necessary, but it's just a little extra step that I wanted to give to my piece. To accommodate the 1/4 inch plywood panel that I had cut for the back, I needed to square off the corners of the rabbet. That was easily done in just a couple minutes with a hammer and chisel. I dropped the back panel into place just to make sure that it would fit, but I didn't secure it yet. I'll show you why in just a little bit. Then it was time to turn my attention to the drawer boxes. Even though I ripped down all my plywood for the height of the drawer boxes, I waited to cut the actual dimensions until the dresser box was built. I used my table saw to cut a 1/4 inch groove about a 1/4 inch from the bottom edge of the drawer box pieces. The depth of the drawers isn't so much a problem, but the width of the drawers is really finicky, and if it's not right, then the drawer slides won't function properly. I found it's much easier to sand my drawer pieces before I assemble the boxes. I used glues and screws to hold my drawer box pieces together. I pre-drilled on the ends of the front and back pieces. I'm sharing the full free building plans for this dresser on my website. I'll leave a link in the description box so you can go check it out. I then aligned the front and back to one of the side pieces, creating 3/4 of the box. I pre-drilled and drove 2.5 inch screws holding the pieces together. For the bottom of drawer boxes, my favorite material of choice is actually whiteboard. It's about 1/4 inch thick, and the smooth coating on top makes it really easy to clean out the drawer bottoms, especially when they're going to be used by kids. After cutting the plywood panels to size, I slid them into the groove of the partially assembled drawer boxes. I then added the last side piece, clamped it in place, pre-drilled, and drove more 2.5 inch screws to complete the entire box. Before installing the drawers, I moved back to the dresser box and gave all the edges a nice 1/2 inch round over using my trim router. Moving on to the base, I then cut 4 4-inch tall legs from 1 3/8 inch dowel. I have a center finding jig that I got from Rockler, and I used it to find the center of the ends of the leg pieces. I needed to draw a line directly perpendicular from the center of the end of the dowels. I'm sure there's lots of ways to do this, but what worked for me was actually to use a laser level and then just mark where the intersecting lines hit the sides of the dowel. The best way for you to let me know what you think about this project is to leave a comment down below, and while you're at it, hit that thumbs up button. On that perpendicular line, I measured and marked where I needed to drill holes to accommodate the cross support dowels that would hold the leg pieces together. I then used a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to drill holes 3/4 of an inch deep. This is another one of those applications that would be ideal if you had a drill press, but I was very careful with my hand drill and able to get pretty perpendicular holes. Next, I used my miter saw to cut 2 28 inch lengths of 3/4 inch dowel. I applied a liberal amount of carpenter's glue and added a few more drops of rapid fuse to help hold the joint together. Luckily, my dowels fit into the holes really snugly, but looking back, I probably should have clamped them together just to be on the safe side. Once the leg assemblies were dry, I flipped the dresser box upside down and placed the legs in a crisscross pattern. I measured to ensure that the legs were sitting equally from the front, back, and sides. I then used a pencil to trace the location of the legs onto the dresser box. I removed the legs and drilled perpendicularly through the bottom of the dresser box. I then moved the leg assemblies back in place, applied some glue, and drove 2.5 inch screws from the inside of the dresser box. I flipped it over and made sure that it was sitting level before I could move on to installing the drawer boxes. There's lots of good tutorials out there for installing drawer boxes, so I'll leave a link to one in the description box. Installation kind of depends on the type of hardware that you use. I used 16-inch traditional Euro-style drawer slides. I find full extension drawer slides can lead to tip-over problems with this kind of furniture. They have their place, but I usually don't like them with a standard dresser. If you want to know more about my opinion about full extension drawer slides, send me a message and I'll be happy to answer. Now that I knew the exact width of my drawer faces, I cut them down to size and set them aside. Before I could apply my finish, I noticed the plywood edges had a few little defects. Since I knew I wasn't going to be staining this material, my favorite wood filler product is DAP plastic wood. It comes in a number of different colors, so you just buy the color that you know is going to match the finished color of your piece. Once the plastic wood filler is dry, you can give it a quick sand and the holes will pretty much disappear. As I mentioned before, this dresser is going to be built for my 9-year-old boys. They're really rough on furniture, so I wanted to choose a finish that could be easily touched up later. I went with Simple Finish with Wax from Maker Brand Co. I applied 2 coats to both the dresser body as well as the drawer faces. Next, it was time to put everything together. I slid the drawer boxes in place and then began to attach the false drawer fronts. There's lots of hacks for attaching drawer fronts, but the one that I've been using lately is to use a little bit more rapid fuse on the back of the drawer fronts and then just drop them into place and hold them for a few seconds while the rapid fuse sets up. I used 1/8 inch shims and a couple of old business cards to align the drawer faces perfectly within the opening. Once the rapid fuse starts to set, I grabbed a clamp so I could hold the drawer face tightly in place. I then carefully reached in through the back of the drawer box, pre-drilled, and drove 1 1/4 inch screws on both ends. Here's a little tip when you're installing inset drawers. Add a little folded over tab of tape to the top of each drawer so you have a handle to pull it out temporarily while you're working. Next, I used a measuring tape to find the location for the integrated finger holes in the drawer fronts. To make sure all my drawer pulls or holes are all aligned visually, I like to measure from the edge of the dresser instead of from the drawer front itself. Once I marked the location, I removed the drawer boxes and set them down. I then carefully used a Forstner bit to drill 1 3/8 inch holes all the way through the false drawer fronts as well as the front of the drawer boxes. To smooth the inside of the holes, I used a cordless Dremel rotary tool with a sanding drum attachment. I could have been done at that step, but I wanted to continue this whole roundover theme. I used my trim router again, this time with a 3/8 inch roundover bit to smooth the edges of the holes. To smooth the raw edges of the plywood, I used a little bit more simple finish on a rag to wipe the inside of each hole. The very last step was to finally attach the back panel. I pushed it in place inside the rabbet of the back edge. I then measured opposite corners to make sure that the entire dresser was square. Amazingly, it was. Honestly, this step is out of the normal order of operations. I should have checked the dresser box for square before I installed the drawers. To hold the panel in place, I drove 1 1/4 inch 18 gauge brads using a finish nailer. With the back panel installed, I moved the dresser in place, and I was done. You typically only see exposed plywood edges on Baltic birch or really expensive types of plywood. But I personally love the look, and I don't mind the little defects that this inexpensive pine plywood had. I really like how the dowel base turned out. It was so simple, but it just gives a really classic modern design. My only complaint is at 4 inches high, you can't see much of the legs from the front of the dresser. However, I don't regret making the legs that short. Keeping the legs on the shorter side helped lower the center of gravity, and that's going to help reduce the tip over risk, which is especially good when I have my kids using this piece. Like I said in my armchair video, I really think round shapes and full radiuses are coming back. But even if they aren't, I love this piece, and I'm definitely glad I went with the round design. If you like simple modern style furniture, make sure you check out this video, and this one as well. And honestly, you just need to subscribe to my channel, because simple and modern is kind of my jam. Remember to give this video a big ol' thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, guys.